Okay, so what experience do you have for the role?
I'm a grassroots campaigner in education and in LGBT plus and in refugee rights, both at UCL and more broadly in the country, in the student movement. And I'm also a rep on my course, where I've lobbied for action against, for example, the extenuating circumstances policy, which I think is dreadful for people with mental health problems and needs to change. And I'd like to carry on doing that as a SAB.
Then how would you build on the work of the current PSO? So what has Saguna done well? What needs to change? What needs to go further?
Well, Saguna's done a good job in integrating the postgrad association sort of more into postgrad life, but I mean that needs to carry on and go further. But most importantly, I think the postgrad teaching assistants need to be paid a far better wage, and Saguna said that she would do that in her manifesto, and unfortunately not much has been done there. A few years ago a campaign took place in the History of Arts department where far better wages are won in a matter of a few weeks. I think a grassroots campaign like that needs to be built in every department at UCL to really bring senior management to account on that issue.
So some of the other candidates to this role have a really heavy focus on careers and on community, whereas your focus is clearly much more on campaigning. Mm-hmm. So why is that the choice, the route that you've gone down?
Because I think talking about graduate careers does the government's job for it, because the government wants to privatise universities, and it is putting in through corporate reforms to make that the case. For example, I met with the civil servant behind the Teaching Excellence Framework, which is designed, despite its fluffy name, to essentially rank universities according to how well their graduate prospects are. And I think that is a serious problem because it promotes a sort of transaction logic where we want to get the best for our £9,000 a year, when in fact the problem is that we're paying £9,000 a year for education, which benefits society as a whole and not just individually. And it's very narrow and I think unhelpful to think like that. What we need to be doing is pushing student rights across the country.
So the issue of postgraduate teaching assistants being paid unfairly, which is on your manifesto, has been on postgraduate students officer candidates' manifestos for as long as I've been at UCL, which is 4 years. Why will things change this year?
Because I won't just make petitions and sit at my office desk. I will get involved directly. I'll walk around every department at UCL and I'll meet people, get meetings together, get a campaign going, and I will do what I can to bring senior management to account if I can get postgrads to support me. This hasn't been done for a few years, and in fact when it was last done, about 4 or 5 years ago in the History of Arts department, as I mentioned, this brought out really good changes, and if we can repeat that, it'll be a great victory.
So you mentioned childcare, mental health, disability support, and you've also mentioned LGBT work. So would you be interested in working with liberation campaigns more widely if you get the position, and if so, what sort of thing would you be interested in working on?
Right, so we all have a lot in common, I think, all of these liberation groups, because not only are most postgrads in some way or another involved in one of them, or it affects one of them, but there are lots to unite them in the sense of lack of funding is central. For example, mental health provision, UCL likes to rationalise not giving enough by saying that it needs to have a formal policy between diagnosed and undiagnosed mental health conditions. All that really means is that psychological services don't have to provide as much service and support as they should. It's similar with disability support, where having a few rooms that are disability and wheelchair accessible means that UCL don't feel too worried about expanding that everywhere else. Accessibility is a massive issue, especially for people in wheelchairs. And I think what I would want to do is to make sure that as a rep for postgrads, I would push for far better funding for welfare as a whole, because the idea that postgrads are somehow more mature, older, so they don't need to worry about welfare concerns is a real mistake, and it seems to be a big problem at UCL.
Do you think that sabbatical officers should actually be paid £25,000?
I think sabbatical officers need to be there and given the resources to do everything they say they're going to do. But if they're not going to do it, then they aren't working for their money. And I think the union needs to be far more democratic, so that people, when they're elected, are forced to be accountable to the people who have elected them. UCL have been promoting the idea that being a SAB officer is a grad job like no other, and I think this is really harmful, really, to the democratic process that UCLU ought to represent, which is bringing student concerns and interests to the forefront of people's lives, and to make sure that they can fight for their rights.
Mm-hmm.